Hello and welcome. Today we're going to have a look through the Mental Capacity Act. I know there'll be some people who will be looking at this as a refresher, and there'll be some people who will be looking at this as workers who maybe have been redeployed and are needing to work in care settings or supporting people who might fall within the legislation of the Mental Capacity Act. So I thought it would be of use to pop through some of the principles of the Mental Capacity Act at this time and at all times, the statutory principles. So the statutory principles of the Mental Capacity Act are the same as they always were, and they help us and they justify our work, they justify our practice. So the first principle is principle 1, which means that we assume capacity. We never say that somebody doesn't have capacity. People may have an impairment or a disturbance of the mind or brain, which would lead them to fall within the code of practice. But what we must do as workers is always assume that people have the ability to make the decision. And to do that, we must use principle 2, which is supported decision making, which means that we must afford them the opportunity to make the decision or choice. So the Mental Capacity Act is about a specific decision or choice, and we must make sure that we've done everything practicable, everything that we can to support that decision making. So whether that decision is about making a cup of tea, getting dressed, what I wear today, where I go, obviously at the moment that one's a little bit restricted for all of us, but all the way through to what happens at the end of my life, what happens with medication. If the person can be supported to make those decisions themselves and have the mental capacity to do that, then that should be afforded. The really important principle to support decision making, the really important thing is that we make sure that we record how we've done it. How have we actually supported that person to make that decision? If I think about supporting decision making, for me, it takes a lot of energy and time, especially if that's about a decision that I'm not usually aware of or don't completely understand because it's not part of my everyday life. So supporting decision making, principle 2, really important. Principle 3 is one that we always are challenged with in all times, really. And it's the principle that people have the right to make an unwise decision. And I think the whole thing is unwise in whose eyes? I've made decisions that other people might think are unwise from their perspective, from their judgment, from their life experience. But actually, for me, that's the right thing to do at the time of life that I'm at now. So principle 3, people have the right to make an unwise decision. Always go back to say, what have you done to support them with that decision making so they understand the outcomes? Okay. Sometimes people do make unwise decisions, they don't understand the outcomes, and then we move on to principle 4, which is that actually we should act in the person's best interests. So if the person hasn't got the capacity to consent, to understand that particular decision, we need to be mindful as professionals that what we put in place is in the person's best interest. It's the best thing for them. And we need to really make sure that we meet that best interest criteria, and there is a statutory list for that to support us. Okay. Principle 5 then is if we do something in somebody's best interests, we must also make sure that we put in place the thing that is the less restrictive to their freedom of rights and actions. Okay, so it's no good putting something in place to keep somebody ultimately safe, which is the most restrictive thing that we could do for them. Okay, so we need to be thinking about what's the less restrictive thing that we could put in place that will proportionately support this person to stay safe at this moment in time. The card that you've just seen actually was designed by some people with learning disabilities, autism and mental health, where people might say they didn't have capacity to understand the Mental Capacity Act, but it was delivered in a very different way to them as a training session. They said, staff have a card, so we wish a card, and this is the card that they came up with. You've just seen the front. And the back, I think, just really, really reiterates what was just talked about. Start by thinking I can make a decision. Do all you can to help me make that decision. You mustn't say I lack capacity because my decision seems unwise or it's unwise in your eyes. Go back and support me a bit more, please. But if I can't make a decision, use the best interest checklist for me, and check the decision doesn't stop my freedom more than needed. Really, really, really important things to be thinking about. Alongside that, we also use a functional a sort of assessment of people's capacity. So functionally, we think about can the person understand the information? So we've got a little bit of a rider on us there to make sure we're delivering that in an understandable way. Can they retain or remember that information? Can they use and weigh it? So can they look at outcomes, and can they communicate back to us in any way possible what their thoughts and wishes are about this situation? So really, really important things for us to be thinking about recording against at this moment in time. Okay, so we know we're in strange times. We know those times at some point will end. Mental capacity is so important, and I've been thinking about this, and I've been thinking actually my capacity hasn't changed, but my choices have changed. There are more restrictions upon me at the moment. So what I'd say when we're thinking about supporting people with the Mental Capacity Act is let's think out of the box, let's be flexible. What choices can we offer? We know that we're restricted, but what choices can we offer? Think about our lives, how small choices and activities are so important to you right now. I know they are to me. Think about how we can incorporate that into people's support and care plans. And think about how some of those choices might be different than they usually are because of the situation that we all find ourselves in. So these are some pictures of some of the things that are important to me at the moment. Listening to the birds in the morning, and the birds have really inhabited my garden. So the choice of just being that well-being thing of being out and about, where I can be within safe and structured spaces, so important to me at the minute. Feeling the sun, we've been very lucky that it's been really nice weather recently, but the flowers that come out. Communicating with people, keeping up some level of communication. Now, not everybody's got IT, not everybody's got the ability to see their loved ones. Maybe we could write letters, maybe that's a good thing to be doing. Maybe also, you know, if we're working care and support, we can get people to reply. So it can be a two-way conversations. Two-way conversations so important. Using the phone, using technology, using the old ways of doing stuff. Writing a letter, sending a picture, but also helping people to reciprocate. Doing a little bit of exercise, thinking about our well-being, so important at this moment in time. So when we're thinking about people's care and support plans, or we're thinking about how we're supporting people, even if that might be long distance social distancing, can we have conversations? Can we start to incorporate some of these things? I'm sure that people have already started to do this. Some of the lovely things that I've seen on the media are where carers really are embracing thinking about all these different choices and decisions in people's lives. Maybe we've always done them, and we probably have, but they've not been as paramountly important in the past. Okay. Knowing what the Mental Capacity Act and the legislation says in respect of coronavirus is so important as well. So there is something about us keeping up to date with regulations that are out there. This is one that I thought was quite useful, that's come out in the 2020 regulations, and it's regulation 6. No person may leave the place where they are living without reasonable excuse. So reasonable excuse includes the right to take exercise. So for people who might not understand the restrictions that are upon them, and exercise is integrally important to their well-being, it gives us a regulation to support us. Obviously, within that regulation, what we're doing is we're thinking very clearly about a risk assessment for the individual. So we all know about social distancing. But if it is somebody, I don't know, somebody with a learning disability or autism who needs to have that exercise to support them because otherwise they have behaviours of concern, they don't understand why they can't go out, then we need to think about when we're taking them out, how often we're taking them out, where we're taking them, so obviously out in the countryside, and them understanding to a point that social distancing when we're doing that. So taking them to places where there aren't as many people and we're not putting them at risk. And doing those risk assessments, doing that balance of people's rights at the moment. I suppose if we're working with people who are older, maybe people with dementia, again, exercise is going to be so important. But what we will need to do there, and possibly with other groups of people, is look at the health impacts. If they are in a high risk group, then the exercise might be around the garden. It might be, can we have a little walkway in the home? Can we be doing something different to exercise? But I think it's really important that this regulation is in there, so it gives us that ability to balance people's well-being, and we must think about that. So supporting decision making wherever we can, please do it at the minute. I mean, so important at any moment in anybody's life. But for the individual, can they keep learning? Can they learn a new hobby? Can we introduce something new for them? So important to keep people's spirits up. Do they feel connected? Can we find ways to connect them to ourselves as the people who come in and support them, which that's a great way of being connected, but connected to the wider world as well. Are there other ways we can do? We need to take notice. Can they give back? Can it be a two-way process where we can be giving? And how do we support people to be active? All of those things so important at this time. So we said that if somebody doesn't have capacity, we need to act in their best interests. Make sure our actions are in the person's best interest. Please still follow the statutory guidance of working in a person-centred way, looking at the wishes and thoughts of the person when they did have capacity, involving other people to find out what they are, and then providing the less restrictive option for them. And this slide is one that I use for training quite a lot, and I think it's just an important slide really. When we look at best interests for people, it's all about me. So the person cannot consent to whatever the outcome is, but it's still all about the person. So right in the middle of the slide there, really, the emphasis is on determining the person's wishes and feelings, and what they would have wished at the time that they had capacity. This is integral to a final best interest decision. We still need to be working with that very clearly. So the Mental Capacity Act also affords us the ability, all of us, to make decisions about what might happen when we don't have capacity. So the slides that we've just looked at are about kind of everyday decisions and the 5 principles of the Mental Capacity Act. These ones I've added in because a number of people have contacted and said, what about advanced decisions and advanced statements at this moment in time? So people will have made advanced decisions and advanced statements when they have capacity. The most important thing is that we as staff know where these advanced decisions and advanced statements are, and we're able to produce them if we need to. And we're able to record against people's beliefs and values, which influence their decisions when they had capacity, so that we can offer that within best interests as well. Advanced decisions to refuse treatment at the minute, I suppose, very important. Some people will have them, and these are the ones that we would clearly need to know where they were. We would clearly need to know that the person was not coerced into making them and that they were the person's wishes. They've made when the person has capacity. They will be made against specific treatments, so decision to refuse specific treatments. The important thing is that the person says what they don't want and when they don't want it. It is binding. If it's about life-sustaining treatment, it needs to be in writing. So we must be able to recognise that the advanced decision is valid. We must be able to know that it's on file for that person, and we must be able to know how and where to produce it if it's required. Just thinking about making decisions in Shrewsbury and Telford hospitals, beginning of the year, I think it was. It might have been a little bit earlier than that, but they took on the RESPECT documentation, which is the recommended summary plan for emergency care and treatment. Very useful, really. The person's making it while they have capacity, but so useful. This is the format, and some people will be used to this. The person's preferences when they have capacity is very clearly in point 2 on the front of point 3 on the front of the RESPECT documentation. So as well as the clinician's views on what is important for the person from a medical perspective, There's also the person's views on what's important to me from my perspective at this point in time. So there again is a balance on the respect documentation. The person's wishes, views, feelings and thoughts really need to be on there for it to be an appropriately filled in respect documentation. On the back page of the respect documentation, on the back page of it, point 6 talks about being involved in making the plan, and it talks very much about mental capacity and supporting the person to make the decision. So the respect documentation is the person's wishes and thoughts with obviously the guidance as well from their medical practitioners. It belongs to the person. It's integrally important to the person. So when we're using respect documentation, we need to be making sure that it's filled in with that balance. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this has been of use to you. I've popped some little websites on the last slide for you around Skills for Care, a card on legislation of mental capacity, which is the 5 principles. Sky's got some nice little videos, and it's also got the Mental Capacity Forum on there, so you can have a look. There's lots and lots of information from lots of different settings, lots of different care settings. There's a little bit of a video that we were involved in Shropshire, which follows the 5 hand card, and mental capacity in law and the COVID crisis are on there as well. I can, if you wish to, if you want to get in touch with Joint Training, do a little bit of an online session for you where we could have an interactive question and answers against the slides. So if you feel that that might be useful to you, then please get in touch. Thank you so much for watching. Hope this has been useful at this time. Take care and be safe.